Great. Kia ora. Welcome to the Women Revolutionizing Housing online learning and networking event. The theme of the Homefulness show this month is designing connections with neighbors, because wherever we are with where we live, we can always have a better connection with our neighbors to create more resilience and belonging for ourselves and for our neighbors. So whether we're in a conventional neighborhood where it's a little bit harder to know our neighbors, or we're in a intentional community, we can always foster a little bit more neighborliness. I'd like to just see a show of hands. Who is in an intentional community where you've sort of chosen your neighbors? You chose where you are living because you and your neighbors have decided that's where you want to live together. You have that common. I'm one of these people who actually live in an intentional community. Where I live is called Riverside. It's been established 84 years ago as a conscientious objector sort of safe haven. And it's morphed and changed many times over the years. And it's more like a non-religious, but it does have a trust. So it does have still a purpose and a mission, which is around sustainability and peace building. Actually, those are the trust where I'm living. That's the mission here. But I won't be here for very long, so I'm hoping to have an intentional community I can live in when I leave here. The topic today is, what neighborly connection have you had over the last week? And how was that interaction? What was sort of either the result, or how was that beneficial to you, or was it challenging? So I can start. I went away for a week, but I had a neighborly connection before I left home, because I was going to be gone for so many days that I needed someone to help me with my cat, to ensure she had food and water and just make sure she was okay. So I went over to my next door neighbor, Phil, who's been here for 40 years, had a really nice conversation with him, catching up on some of the things that he finds important in his life, which was really nice just to have a very casual conversation with him. And then I asked if he would help me with my cat, which he did. And I came home and she was very well looked after, and then had a bit of a catch up when I returned. And it felt really good to be able to leave my cat in good hands and feel like I've got a neighbor that I can trust. So that was my good neighbor connection. And I hope to have a neighbor meal with my two immediate neighbors within the next 2 weeks. We like to have a quarterly catch up and a meal together.
My name is Beata and I live in Blenheim, and for nearly 2 years I am living in what we call co-space. So we not have our own building or homes, we're actually sharing a house, and we purchased a house together. But we're not in a relationship as such. And we got a third person in the moment living with us, and that is my son, my grown-up son, who came from overseas and joined us. So it is like a change, having three people. The positive, I'm just remembering last night's meal that my son made a fantastic meal, and how much that is to be appreciated when you don't have to cook every day. You can actually spread that over the week. I think we're doing really well with that. We're not too fussed about the cost. We've sort of sorted that, what's there, and we've got a garden, so anything can come in from the garden to supplement the meal. So yeah, there are definitely the positive things about living together under one roof, or calling it co-space. But maybe some other time I also maybe address the co-space, the definition, and that needs to be sometimes worked on.
Yeah, co-living, co-space.
Yes.
Who would you like to go next, Berta?
Oh, Megan. That would be nice to hear from Megan.
And just also to say where you are, where you're based.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Megan. I am based in Rotorua in the North Island. Thank you for nominating me. I've had a few different. So I live just in a normal residential home. My mum lives here with us as well, my husband and two kids. We've been doing a lot outdoors recently, just on the property, like building gardens and stuff. And just that on its own has enabled more connection with our neighbours. We have two neighbours that we have quite a lot of informal kind of connections with. But our neighbour at the back, her husband's recently died, so she pops around and chats, just walking her dog and things like that quite often. And the neighbours on the other side have a child of similar age, so they're all the time just at the back fence, hanging over the fence, talking to each other. But just being outdoors more recently, because we've had a bit more time up our sleeves over the long weekend and whatnot, has just enabled that connection way more than it would have if we hadn't been kind of making the most of being outside. And that's been nice. It's been really nice, actually. And I will pass on to Bronwyn.
I'm in Wellington, and yeah, I live in just a regular residential home. I was one of the founders of the Urban Habitat Collective. We tried to do a co-housing project in Wellington a few years ago that got COVIDed. So I still have aspirations to live in co-housing. My friends Simone and Vincent from Tākaka Co-housing Neighbourhood starting a co-housing development company, and they're planning a project in Wellington. So that's very exciting. Sam, my husband, and I are involved in that. Now that our kids have left home, it all seems a little bit more like it's time for change. And in terms of neighbourliness, I live in Island Bay and my kids grew up here. So there's lots of great people around that it's really lovely to be in community with. I've just been away for 3 months. I've been sailing in an ocean yacht race. So I haven't had a lot of neighbourly interactions recently just because I haven't been here. But I'm looking forward to catching up with all of the people that are around. I do know that my immediate neighbourhood has a WhatsApp group and it's very cute. Quite often there's a sort of, I need a quick unpick. Does anybody have one? Yes, I'll leave it in the letterbox. So yeah, just a nice way of technology enabling people to connect in the moment. And even if they're not necessarily seeing each other all the time, that having that channel of being able to reach out to people nearby is really cool. So I will pass on to Angela.
Hello. I live in Wellington in Newtown, which in of itself has been really great because of the community center. But I live kind of in a row of townhouses that goes up a set of stairs. But I don't feel like I interact with the neighbors as much as I would like to, because I think a lot of the tenanted properties, I just have people who don't really want to know us. But we have interactions here and there. But the one that's most recent that was quite nice is probably about 2 weeks ago, because we've been really wanting to go to the gallery that one of our neighbors has opened in the city on Cuba Street. So during Cuba Dupo, we actually finally went, and they had this really beautiful, what this type of event is, but it's like you put on paper like what kind of theme or topic somebody put like a politician's name, and then they were like making music based off of that. And it was like a whole bunch of different like harp and saxophone and drums and everything, and we just stood with the owners of this gallery that we knew and with our kids, and we got to interact with them that way. Yeah. I'll pass to Lisa.
So I'm in Auckland and I live in my own house. I'm currently actually looking to set up a co-housing property in Kerry, the Kerry area. And I'm just in the phase of, there seems to be lots of properties that are great up there, and I just need to find the right people to be involved with. As far as my neighbours now, I'm in a cross lease, and my immediate next door neighbour who in the cross lease, she unfortunately has mental health issues. She's a hoarder and she's very hostile. So that is not an ideal neighbour situation. But my other two neighbours I get on great with, see them in the driveway all the time. And my neighbour down the back, she's a tramper and so am I. So just the other day we were comparing tramping stories from tracks we've been on, the same tracks and things. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I live on the west coast of BC, British Columbia in Canada. I live with my mother. She's 84. She invited me to base myself with her. And we live in the basement of the house she owns, and we have tenants upstairs who we see almost every day. We don't have a locked door between our living spaces, which I love. And a neighborly thing that happened with me this week is actually pretty big. I chose to go kind of for the first time, for the first time ever, to the local community association's meeting. Like, not just the event that they put on for everybody, but the meetings where they're planning things. And I ended up becoming a member of the community association. A few days later, I went to their coffee and conversation that happens once a month only. And then I went to the Easter egg hunt that the community association put on for the local neighborhood. And it was attended by so many people. And I found out because I offered to help. I said, do you have a job I can do? And they gave me the membership, finding people to become members. So I learned a lot about different people, where they were coming from. And it's been super sweet, because my purpose for going is that I'm doing a hyper local food security project. And I want to do it with my neighbors, my immediate neighbors. So I know quite a few of them already, and some of them have been really gung-ho to hear about the project. It's so cool to see it, to have it rolling because of this community association connection that just happened to be very busy this week. And yeah, that's it for me.
I'm based in Palmerston North. I've been looking out for communities, intentional communities, as Zola would know, for a few years now, exploring that. In terms of my immediate neighbor, I have a school just next door, and currently they are building a shed with a wall that's like 3 meters high and 12 meters wide, just like 1.5 meters from my fence. So that's like the neighbor I have. I tried to build a tiny house behind my yard as well, but the neighbor behind was not happy with it. So unfortunately, in terms of my immediate neighbors, is not what I would like in terms of like communities, like Nicola was mentioning and Bronwyn was mentioning about sharing and all that. That's still a community I'm looking to work on creating. It's just been taking a while. But on a separate note, I actually went to a community village, which is just like down the road from where I live. And they were very welcoming. Like, they also was asking me if I would like to join them. And they basically have a small area that they have expanded to like a library, and they have a space for rent as well. So yeah, I was thinking that might be a community that's not so much on a daily basis, but more on a broader community that's close by. So that's an immediate one that I came across. I've been living here for 15 years, but never actually like gone in there to talk to the people there. Okay, so let's pass on to Casey.
Okay, I am living in Northland in Anarahi, which is just outside of Whangarei. Our neighborhood is on a real steep hillside with a long drive, so all the properties are pretty separated by trees and stuff. You can't really see each other. And our neighbor directly next to us is a rental, so there's just been a series of people coming and going. So I haven't made much effort to get to know the people, because then they move out and there's new people there. So there isn't a huge amount of interaction with the neighbors here, unlike other places I've lived where I've known my neighbors very well. I find New Zealand a little bit hard to get to know the neighbors. They seem a little bit more reserved, and you have to really go out of your way to connect with them. But I have pockets of friends in different places, like Parua Bay. Most of my friends are like 20 minutes away or in town. So my community is kind of just spread out all over the place at the moment. But I have a house with 5 bedrooms, and I just finished building a sleep out of cob. So that's going to be my girl cave. And the house is 3 stories, and it has 2 kitchens. And there's like a little self-contained apartment downstairs. And so I'm going to have to sell the property to a co-owner, hopefully, and buy out my ex. So I've been talking to a real estate agent to see how I can figure this out to sell part of the house to someone else so I can stay here and also keep one of the rooms retained for my twin daughters. until they're out of college. They will hate that idea because they're very private. But I've lived in some co-housing communities, and I'm an old lady, but I still travel. I still stay in hostels because I'm totally comfortable being around loads of people. And I have like 5,000 cousins. So I'm just used to being around lots of people, and it doesn't bother me at all. So I'm hoping to find other women, particularly, that want to live in a co-housing situation and they all get along well. And it's just so much more affordable to share a big house than obviously to just own it myself. So that's kind of where I'm heading and hoping to get in about a year or so, get that sorted out. I did have a talk with a gal named Gabby a couple days ago who's looking to find some land somewhere in Northland and do a small community with maybe half a dozen people.
I'm
But
involved with Gabby.
it sounds great. I wouldn't want to be too far away from the Whangarei area just because all my friends and my kids are here. So it sounds like she's looking much further afield for more affordable properties pretty far away from here. But yeah, I'm kind of interested in what she's doing, but she also made it sound like she's got to come up with all this money to get the consent, and then there's not a guarantee that they're going to say yes. So I'm just, after experience in Ahiwai in Whangarei, I only list a couple $100 to join them, but other people lost thousands of dollars on that project, and I'm really, really wary about paying for anything that's not a for sure deal. But I like the idea of what she's trying to put together, so I'm just going to sit tight and see if they get any further with that.
Okay. And then I think, Val, you're the last one who hasn't spoken. We've got Megan, who attended the last Women Revolutionizing Housing event and brought this most amazing research that she did for her master's degree, which looks more like a PhD to me in terms of the amount of work you've put in. It's absolutely astonishing. So I'm grateful that you managed to make it your way down to the retreat so that we could see your project, but then how wonderful that you're also able to share it here. And granted, we only have about a half an hour for you to share, and we've got time for Q&A, but it's the start of something, and I guess we can just keep working on it if you need feedback in terms of developing these resources further. So this is just the second run in terms of a public getting to hear about it, and I think it's a both and. You probably want to hear from us. What do we find interesting and useful out of the resources you've made, and also how we can hopefully at some point make use of it ourselves. Okay, over to you, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity, Zola, to talk to all of you here. My name is Megan, based in Rotorua, and as of Boxing Day last year, I just finished my master's, and my research I titled Finding Home in a Broken System, the Inadequacies Within the Housing System and How Accessible Information Can Impact Housing Journeys. And I had a special focus throughout on communal living arrangements or collective housing arrangements. We've already talked a bit about me, but that's just a brief little thing about my family. So my research, I'm not going to talk in depth about my research. I'll talk about my findings, but really just to give you a bit of context, I started my research with this kind of thread or the seed of this idea around wanting to create this communal living arrangement pilot plan or blueprint, because this was a desire for me, and this was something that I wasn't looking at and I'm still looking at doing, but I didn't want everyone, when they're starting to do it, having to start from scratch every time. So giving a bit of a baseline or some kind of repository of information for people. And when I started looking into this, so many things kind of started popping up. One was around this kind of idea that was coming to me about if people had the capacity, the momentum, the desire to do it, they're going to do it with or without my research. So who am I really trying to help with this? This was a thought going on in the background. And then I started to dig into the housing sector and realizing that housing across the spectrum is just so complex. And so everyone from, if you think of the housing continuum, from emergency housing all the way through to home ownership, and all of these spaces, people were really struggling. And where do I want to focus? Who am I trying to help? And I got to the point where I realized everything is so fragmented and complex that even the basic projects, the residential building projects, even just putting a house up, a standard house, can be really difficult. So how are these alternative projects even going to stand a chance in this housing ecosystem, in this space? I've skipped heaps of pages, but from my research, essentially what I took away is that there's this affordability piece. Housing is just, as you guys have already spoke to, so unaffordable. There's the regulatory environment, which is just hampering all of the housing kind of projects across the spectrum. And then there's this kind of community support issue. Sorry, that's probably the wrong word. I suppose we alluded to it before when we're talking about forming relationships with our neighbours and stuff. There's just, and someone spoke to it before about how New Zealand, it's quite hard to do that. The community support systems are not as strong as we need it for flourishing society. And from that, I thought, what can I do? And I took this idea of accessibility of information. How do I help people have access to reliable, understandable, and tailored information to help people navigate their housing options and make informed decisions about their housing journey and their living situations? So from that, I made 4 key outputs, 2 of which I'm only going to talk to 2. I'll be talking about the custom app, which I've titled Aotearoa Housing Pathways, and I'll talk about my collective housing workbook as well. So what I'm going to do is the app is huge and I have to kind of flick between screens. So what I'm going to do is just talk to it on my PowerPoint for a few minutes, and then I'll just briefly show you the app, because otherwise it'll take 15 minutes for me to walk you through the app. So the app is supposed to be a repository of information for people and resources, with holistic resources embedded in there, because I think, as everyone is probably very well aware, when people come up against housing issues, it's not like you wake up one day and you've got this issue. There's lots of things that can impact your housing journey, and it's a holistic journey. So there's supposed to be a bunch of resources there to support that. But the key idea, the key function of the app is actually the housing continuum, like putting yourself on the housing continuum where you currently are. And that can be anything. I'm in emergency housing, I'm in a rental, I'm in any one of those options. And where do you want to be? And then it tailors a pathway for you to get from where you are to where you want to be. That's the goal anyway. That's the gold standard, the app that I'm trying to create. And so it takes you through this assessment. And obviously it needs a lot of information from you to be able to create that pathway. And it's all there on the screen. Where do you want to live? Are you willing to move? What's your financial situation? All of those things. And it takes your results and it qualifies you against all of the different housing opportunities that exist that are inputted into the system, at least. Because one of the key takeaways I took from my research is that a lot of people don't actually understand what options are out there. And when they do hear about them, there's literally been people that don't believe that it's true, or that people are going to be taking their money off them, or all these kind of misunderstandings about what exists. That can really help people if they were to understand what was there. So it qualifies you against opportunities. It gives you this kind of score, and that's back-end score. It's not going to tell you you're a 1 out of 100 or something like that, but based on your information, filters that information, and it's supposed to pop out a plan at the end. And right now it's not doing that exactly right, but that's because I'm not a tech app developer. But yes, it will create this plan for you with your kind of housing pathways that you're eligible for, and a kind of customized plan for you to get there. All right, so here is what the app looks like. So housing pathways, find your pathway to home. It's a landing page. There's a toggle up here, and you can translate, or you can turn it into Māori. I have not fact-checked the te reo, sorry, because I do not speak it myself. That will be on the list of things to do. But because I am only speaking English, sorry, I'll keep it in the English version, but I wanted to show you that because it's about accessibility. And so it starts off with showing you the kind of the housing continuum, except I've put collective home ownership in here as well, collective ownership. It's not normally on the kind of, and then there's these affordable kind of options here, which are often not understood by your general Joe Blogs person. And so what you can do is you can click on any of these to find out information. So I want to learn about shared equity. Gives you a bit of an overview, who it suits, advantages, providers, case studies, resources. And at any point you see what something you like, you can click start your assessment, and it takes you through that assessment process we talked about. You can go through and find out all the different opportunities there are. And I'll just really quickly jump on the assessment. I'm not going to take you through the whole thing because it takes about 15 minutes. We don't have the time, but just to show you briefly, these are the things it takes you through. So you answer all the questions, and by the time you get to the end, it's going to pop out your results. Otherwise, you can take a look at different options down here. One other thing I wanted to put in here was your alternative, and this is actually Zola, thanks to your input, I put this in. So different ways of owning your own home. So it's not just I want to buy a house on a residential section in a residential town, but just different options that you might have. And then the resources bank, which I found when I went into that this morning, is actually empty currently, but it wasn't last time I looked at it, so I don't know what happened there. But this is where we're supposed to be sitting, that kind of hub of holistic resources, whether it's things like budgeting support or mental health support or how there's so many different things out there when I was doing my research, and it was all gold. And so I'm going to make sure I fill that back up. But that's the app kind of in a nutshell, really.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Megan, that there's also coming into, I think it's getting built now, is called public rental. It's like that KiwiSaver Momentum, I think its name is, or something like that. They are building rental places that are owned by a company rather than by an individual. So that's a new, I can send you information on that, but that's starting to pick up in New Zealand. It's called Build to Rent. If you look
Yes.
at Build to Rent, it's where they're trying to get investors to be a part of an apartment building, I think. And so that's a bit safer than private rental, which is a bit more up to the individual whether they want to terminate the tenancy or raise the rents, versus the public rental, which is more standardized and less volatile.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so that's really in a nutshell the housing app. It's a huge app, so I won't talk to it too much. But the other thing I came to share is about my collective housing workbook. And this is designed as a workbook. So to walk you through some of the key kind of phases or steps of what it would take to set up a collective housing arrangement. I've kept that broad because I wanted to try and assist a multitude of different types of collective housing arrangements, because we've already heard of so many just with our little group of sharing. So once again, I'm going to talk to it in my PDF. I'm happy to share that with anyone who wants any more information. Otherwise, I do have one example on here in a little bit as well. The workbook, this is the roadmap of what it walks you through. And it starts off initially with the people, because I think as a group here, we probably all know that's where it has to start. It has to start with the people and the founding of that group, and making sure you've got that same vision, the same kind of alignment, and you've agreed on conflict resolution methodologies, or how, that those fundamentals are there first. And then it talks you through the governance. So each of these steps is designed, and the workbook explains it really well. You can use as much of it or as little of it as you want, but there's templates embedded into it. So as you actually go through the steps and you fill out the templates, you end up with this whole document of governance. So you've come to the end of it, but you've got every kind of document that you might need. But it is that kind of baseline. It's a book that you can bring your group together with to find out the information you might need in order to achieve these different steps. It's not necessarily going to take you through each of these steps, but once you gather together, you fill out the information, you've got that to go forward and then talk to your lawyers or talk to your accountants or whatever that might be. So you've got your governance, your site selection, and that step there, is a huge one in itself. All of these are financials, but it's supposed to take you all the way from the visioning in the beginning all the way through to that long-term kind of operation. And this is just one example of one piece. So it's like 300 pages long. So it takes you through the purpose of that kind of section, the timing prompt. So each of those kind of steps I showed you before, they interlap and they overlap, but it's fairly chronological, but you'll get pieces that are obviously overlapping, and some will go through the whole process and some will be done and dusted and you move on. But it talks to that in the timing prompt, and cross-reference tells you any other kind of forms or piece of information you might need to know. Gives you the core tasks for that section and then breaks down each of those tasks as you go through. Yeah, and it's huge. At the end of each section, there's different ways you can use the workbook. You could, if you had a group of 20 people, for an example, you might have one lead person who has the workbook, and you gather together and that one workbook gets filled out, or you could each have the workbook, because at the end of the workbook there's like a reflections, so not the end of workbook, end of each chapter, there's like a reflections section, and there's like a checklist to make sure that you can reflect on what has happened and make sure that you are still comfortable with the process, and that if you are not, that you're voicing that, because obviously that's a big part of that kind of community element and working together with people, is that you need to make sure that your entire group has had that space to be able to share and input, and then it has some section for notes and things like that. So it is designed to be used at an individual level, but it can also be used by the lead person per se as well. And that's just a bit of an overview of what I was trying to achieve with my research. I was trying to simplify the complexity in the housing space, make that information accessible, personalize that information, and support that collaborative piece that I think is really missing in order to improve outcomes for people in their housing journeys. Yes, I am on this journey of wanting to move these pieces forward, and I'm in conversation with some people who have received funding for a very similar app idea at the moment, and I'm hoping I can support this app or their app or an amalgamation of both to fruition. So that's been really positive, having some movement on that. Bronwyn and Zola have been supporting the workbook progression as well, so that's been awesome. I suppose one of the reasons I'm here sharing is that both of these things are very much in the prototype stage. I am here to hear from you guys if you have either questions or information for me, things that you think could benefit either of those outputs. Yeah.
Casey?
I just have a comment. I have 20-year-old twins that are living at home, and they don't see any way forward financially to even get an apartment. It was way different back in the day when I was young. You got a job, you got an apartment. I was working part-time, going to school. I could afford to do all those things, and now it's out of reach. So I think your app would be really useful for senior high school students, because they get spat out into the world at 18 and they have no idea how to finance anything, how they're going to get themselves housing. They may have never even heard of co-housing except for flatmate sharing kind of thing. I just think it would be great to educate young people about the realities of trying to find housing once they're adults. It's way more complicated now than it was when I was young.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many more hurdles, and that finance barrier is just so real for almost everyone. But that's a good thought. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be really great to have some seminars where younger people can hear that there's not just the typical buy just what's on the market approach, and give them some hope if they don't have a parent or grandparent to help them, that there's still opportunities. I've just put into the chat two other books that are complementary to what you've done, Megan, because these follow. In the first book, this woman, Lyndall Paris, who created Narara Eco Village in Australia, which now has at least 60 homes built there already and people living there for the last 5 years. It chronicles her journey from just having a vision, and then 15 years or so that she does many different things to get people to buy into the vision, and then how then practically it starts taking shape for different organizational things. And as you said, her main focus was on making sure they had the sociocratic process really well established to help them with the decision making along the way. And the other book I put into the chat is called Creating a Life Together by Diana Leaf Christian, who then follows many different communities, because she says 90% of any sort of collecting housing project fails. And you mentioned Ahiwai being one of them up in the Whangarei area, and yeah, had great things about it, but there were a few things that didn't allow it to succeed. So this woman chronicles both the 90%, the things that create failure, and the 10%, what can create success, and a diversity of different housing models. So that's a good book to watch through, again, the stages of how these different communities have come together. Going back to Megan's research, both the app and the community workbook, what other questions or comments might you have for Megan?
I super appreciate that you mentioned the mental health resources as housing resources. And I've been experimenting with shared living, like small projects of shared living I'm 56, and my first time I tried it was when I was 18, and including one that I set up. And I trained with Diana to learn sociocracy because of the decision-making troubles that were being happened. I didn't want top-down decision-making, but a lot of people were still relating to me as the originator of this project, as the authority. So they were putting me up on a triangle, and kind of, I had all the power and all the responsibility, and I didn't want it like that. A lot of the decision making, a lot of the collaboration, a lot of the basics of living together got off track because of reactivity and less, I'm going to say, stable mental emotional bodies were more susceptible to these kinds of conflicts. But what I found was that over time, even the most together people would either go into fight more often or flight more often or freeze more often. And then if they were in freeze for a long time, they would either go into fight or flee, like very fast and very thoroughly. And so I think that this is important. And I think that the way that the system of systems generally on planet Earth, like the modern industrial complex, approaches mental health is actually very flawed. I love that there's more talk about trauma-informed coaching, yoga, workplace stuff. But I think that the housing situation, how it's going, and how the financial situation of the world is going, more money and fewer people, and the rest of us wondering what the heck we're going to do, especially the next generations coming up, need a completely radical cultural shift about how we relate with ourselves and each other, and then how we can be in a group together. Like, it takes all three of those levels of change. And I also, when I was using sociocracy in my community for a little while, it ended up not working because of just the reactivity that would happen, the kind of assumptions people would make, or the projections they would make, or the stories that they would decide were true. And so I was really stymied, and I ended up, like, I'll put this in the space because I think it's a really fantastic resource. I started studying this stuff called possibility management that maybe some of you may have heard of before.
Yes, I know about it. It is here in New Zealand as well.
Yeah, I know I think possibility management is something that people often go into, learn, and then leave again. And I think it's because even within the field of possibility management, it's that hard. I trained in it for 6 years, and I left because I found that it's that hard to make that shift for the people even who've been inventing it and delivering it. And so I think it's empowered me to start over, to really be like, I really want this. I really want to live collaboratively in a Gaian eco-village. And when I say Gaian, I mean like low tech. And getting out of the habit of using money to buy myself out of all kinds of relating and all kinds of other exchange of currency, really, like exchange of food for work or food for company or food for no reason, and not be keeping track. I recommended a governance and decision style that's called, like, it goes under this heading of Taurus technology. And it's social technologies that are designed to empower circular power structures instead of pyramid power structures. But it's hard to get all that pyramid thinking out of your system. Habit.
I guess the sociocracy is however good it is used, along with however good the people are within it. In the book, Lyndall Paris of the founding Narara Eco Village, she does go into sociocracy about how they used it and how it was helpful, but they really worked on the robustness of the model. And I think they did have some more mature, and they also had a conflict resolution built into the sociocracy when somebody just kept bringing conflict over and over. And then the last piece of it was that because they were a cooperative in terms of a company, if this person was just going to continue to cause problems for everyone else, they could rely on that last ditch effort, which is asking that person to leave according to the cooperative company rules. So it's not a fail safe that it can't work in every situation, but she does say what helped to make the sociocracy work, at least in her situation. I think the other thing with the intentional community side of things, which I see here happening with the circle living, for instance, which is to take the majority of the decisions away from the collective and have the development company be informed by community focused housing, permaculture design principles, and integrating those things into their development rather than relying on the future residents to make decision after decision where they're consulted initially and at just certain points along the way, but the development company is taking the majority of those decisions and factoring in neighborliness, but not necessarily where everything is then meant to be held by all the future residents, if that makes sense, where it's not as heavy in its management or future resident management. It's sort of a light version of some of these other kinds of communities where we've seen the future residents bearing quite a lot of responsibility and financial, and then for the decision making as well.
To acknowledge, I mean, obviously I've had a look at your work before and just so impressed, and really like how your sort of 9 or 10 phases that you put up, you know, of the different aspects. It feels very comprehensive and like that you've covered every aspect, and it's a good sequence, I think, in terms of the things that you have to. There's nothing you can do about it, but the fact is that by setting things out so clearly, you do give people a sense of the scope of the challenge. And that is both an excellent thing and also quite a daunting thing. I mean, it's probably when you get to trying it out on people in the community, it is something that you're going to have to both try to walk that line between being really encouraging, but also not soft soaping just how much work and how much commitment. Like, from my point of view, totally worthwhile commitment, totally excellent way to spend your time and energy. But I guess what I'm conscious of now, having tried but not succeeded in a project, but still wanting the result, is I feel like I'm going into my next kind of iteration without that naive optimism that I started the first one with. And it's kind of like, okay, now I've got experience and more wisdom, more knowledge, more whatever, but I don't have that kind of, woohoo, everything will be fine, we'll just sort it out. I guess it's the flip side of being comprehensive, is that people understand the size of what they're undertaking. But it's just so great that you're trying to really democratize that kind of access to information. But what you realize is that it's so challenging that you really do need a huge number of resources. And if you're lucky, you recruit people who have those complementary skills and abilities. But it is also just a really high barrier to entry. I see what you're trying to do with the information, but you are also up against the fact that we don't have those kind of systems, unlike other countries. In Vienna, if you want to do co-housing, you make an application to the council and there are subsidies and low-cost developers and land put aside. And New Zealand has none of that.
I guess the other thing that we could move towards, which is again that developer partnership approach, which is that if enough people have come together around what they would like and how they want that neighborhood to look and feel, it would be then approaching a developer to partner with them. They'd maybe not have as much profit in the development, but they'd at least be creating something where they definitely are going to have happy residents. I'd love to see more purpose developers in this country. You don't have to have a novice group of lay people taking on the task of development, but can partner with On that note, on the Common Ground website, I'm putting together, curating a property development course that is for folks who would like to live in or create a community-focused neighborhood, whether that be a tiny home neighborhood or an apartment or co-housing, anything like that, where it's going to be the basics of property development along with some of this community-focused housing. If you're interested, you just put your name in as that you're interested either as a future student of the course or if you're very knowledgeable, a service provider. The other one is if you are not subscribed to the Homefulness Show, which is a YouTube and a podcasting app. I've already interviewed 24 people on their different journeys or the expertise. So to listen into a lot of those episodes so you get an idea of, okay, this is how other people have done it. And it gives you just another real life story of people who've created what we're looking to create. And then there's the Patreon community to create more in-depth resources for people who want to take this again a step further, where the Patreon is an opportunity to get more resources, but it also supports me financially to be able to make those resources available and make the Homefulness Show.
I enjoyed
Nope.
your latest fullness podcast episode, Zola. It gave me some food for thought. So
Thanks, Angela. The latest one is on designing connection with neighbors. So it hopefully pushes everyone a little bit outside of the comfort zone to just be a bit more neighborly wherever you are. I really appreciate you all coming. I loved hearing about what you're aspiring to do and that you're part of this network, that we can support each other. I hope to see you all
Zola.
next month. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks,
Have a
Bye.
good day. Bye.